Thank you, Sharon, and good morning. I'm just going to share my screen. Well, thank you so much for inviting us here to bring this motion before Synod regarding net zero carbon. This is a quick overview of what we want to cover during the next 20 minutes, so we are not going to hang about, but move briskly forward. I've also put up a slide just to remind us of the scale of the problem we are facing, which is truly existential. The warming of our world is very dramatic, as you can see. Our motion comes out of the General Synod motion, which emphasizes the crisis for God's creation and the fundamental injustice that results. Developing countries are being far more affected by the crisis at the moment than the developed world. And of course, we, in the long term, here in the developed world, have the resources to adapt. The motion calls on each diocesan synod and cathedral chapter to act to achieve net zero carbon by 2030. Net zero carbon is part of the fifth mark of mission, which calls us to safeguard the integrity of creation and sustain and renew the life of the earth. So we cannot ignore the damage that's being done to God's creation. The earth is the home of God has given us, and all of us have a right to live on it and enjoy life in all its fullness. And this means that the fourth mark of mission also applies here, to transform unjust structures of society and the hardship and death caused by the climate crisis in developing regions of the world is unjust. Let me give you an example. In October 2019, I met Munti, who lives in the village of Al-Gudi in southern Ethiopia, an area that is suffering greatly from climate change. When we asked her about the climate crisis, she said this: "I am angry about how the climate is changing. There is no rain, and when it does come, it is erratic. Fetching water is tough. We have to travel a long distance. We can't produce honey because of the weather. Beekeeping has been a source of income, but it's getting harder. Drought is happening more often, every 2 years instead of every 10. And to those responsible, Munti wanted to say, "You are killing people. We thought it was because of sin, but now we know about climate change. Are you really human beings? Do you have children? Do you have family? I don't think you are a human being to not want to change." And I wonder, how can we blame her for her anger? And I've heard similar things from our brothers and sisters in our linked diocese in Kagera in Tanzania. Rainfall is increasingly unpredictable, making it very difficult to know when to plant crops. Rain always used to come towards the end of September, but now there is no certainty. Rains may come in August and then stop for weeks, leaving the crops that have been planted to shrivel up. Increasingly, when a rain does come, it is sudden and violent, destroying crops and sometimes taking lives. Furthermore, pests that hadn't been seen before in Kagera are becoming increasingly common, as rising temperatures encourage those insects and fungi to multiply. Beans, avocados, even cassava, one of the toughest plants, are being badly affected. We in the UK are also increasingly seeing unusual weather patterns that's making it difficult for our own farmers. Speaking to one last Sunday, he said to me, "We now seem to get blocks of weather. We used to have rain spread through the summer, but now we get long periods when it's very dry, and then a period of rain, and then dry again. This makes it very difficult to farm." However, we are lucky. We have the resources to manage these situations. The people of Kagera and Ethiopia don't. We may also see two other marks of mission apply as well in our response to the climate crisis. I am certain that our action in moving towards net zero carbon is not only responding to human need, but is missional as well. At a recent youth climate rally in Bury, I got a chance to talk about what the church is doing about the climate crisis. I was amazed how many people came up afterwards to say that they were delighted that the church was taking action. And we talked about possible ways in which we could work together. The climate crisis concerns young people greatly, and we need to show that we share their concerns and are doing something about it. Finally, in this introduction, some of you may be thinking that the church's carbon footprint cannot be that big, considering its buildings and other resources. In truth, it probably isn't compared to many large businesses and organizations in our region. However, we need to be showing that we are taking action so that we are an example for others to follow. We need a degree of high ground from which to encourage others to change their current practices and move towards net zero carbon. Now I'm going to ask Bishop Mike to give us some theological background to what we are proposing.
So just 5 quick reasons why theologically we should be engaged in this issue as if you need them. Next slide. This is Shahabona and her daughter Fatima are wading through floodwaters to get clean water near their homes in Bangladesh. As you know, floods often destroy people's homes and crops, which is a direct result of climate change rooted partly in carbon emissions. And while it may not affect some of us as gravely in the UK, we know many of the world's poorest people are in the front line when it comes to the impact, despite contributing very little to the problem. So it is a social justice matter. It matters what we are doing for the poor, for the least of these, our brothers and sisters. Next slide. Second, the environmental issues cause demographic shifts, and while war and conflict are a key cause of refugee crises, so too is environmental degradation. And this crisis has been knocking on Europe's door for some time, as we know, and the knocking is getting louder. We are interconnected and interdependent, and to live as if we are not courts certain disaster. Social justice, interdependence, and third, next slide, stewardship, obviously, following Genesis 1 in particular. But we need to hold together here how human rule is connected with the expression of the image of God in Genesis. Because stewardship is not about a bald assertion of power, not a matter of use, but of care. What links humanity's stewardship to the image of God is that this stewardship is about a delegated participation in God's caring rule over his creatures. Fourth, our place in creation. It is noteworthy that while many readers of Genesis 1 presume the rest of creation was created for the sake of human beings, there is no support for that in the text. Realizing our place in creation is significant, and it is also a question of health and wholeness. Next slide. Wendell Berry provocatively suggests that to talk of the health of an isolated individual is a contradiction in terms, that the smallest unit of health it makes sense to talk of is the health of a community, in its fullest sense, including relationship to others and place, the health of this place, and so on. A healthy person is only healthy by reference to this community, and health is about reconciliation with creation, an aspiration, a call to heal, to be realized in the fullness of time, but nonetheless that upon which our health depends. Fifth and final slide, and far from exhaustively, as Christians, our relationship with creation needs to be understood with the end in mind, indeed shaped by the end in mind. Tom Wright, the New Testament scholar, points out that popular Christianity has tended to think of a non-biblical vision of heaven and hell instead of the revolutionary kingdom of God, so that confusingly we imagine life beyond death as playing harps on fluffy clouds in some soft focus ethereal realm, or alternatively being prodded by tridents at a very uncomfortable and interminable barbecue. That is not the scriptural view, which holds that the future is actually a new heavens and a new earth. This heavens and this earth brought together by God's grace and in which we are called to reign with God. The big show is not a heaven somewhere else, but finally the marriage of this earth, this cosmos, and heaven, as exemplified by celebrating the descent of the New Jerusalem to earth in Revelation, a new heavens and a new earth. And as Wendell Berry notes from Matthew 6, the first principle of the kingdom of God is that it includes everything. In it, the fall of the sparrow is a significant event. If we get our goal and our aim and our end right, maybe we'll get our thinking and acting right, and understand that our vocation as image bearers is to reflect the praises of creation back to Creator, to reflect the Creator's wise and loving stewardship into the world in partnership with God. And this vocation is to be embraced not next year, not next week, but now. Back to Richard.
Thank you very much, Bishop Mike. Well, now diocesan departments are already making strides towards net zero carbon and have plans for the future. So I'll begin by asking Daniel Jones from the Education Department to talk to us about what they are doing. Over to you, Daniel.
Thank you, Richard, and good morning, Synod. It's lovely to be here representing the education team. According to the most recent National Church of England assessment in 2012, schools account for just over half of the total Church of England CO2 emissions. 33% of this relates to primary schools and 19% secondaries. In our diocese, we have 85 Church of England primaries, but just 2 secondaries. So most of our emissions in the school estate relate to primary schools, and our strategy will reflect this. Our diocese has 5 times more churches than schools, but schools are powered and heated for the working week, explaining why they are the biggest contributor to CO2 emissions. Analysis shows that our schools are slightly more energy efficient than the national average. Many of our schools are already well engaged through programs such as Eco School, but there's a huge amount more to be done. Looking at the scope of the Net Zero 2030 target, the areas considered under diocesan control are capital works at our 9 voluntary aided and all operational aspects of the 19 Diocesan Multi-Academy Trust, or MAT, schools, due to the governance structures. The remaining schools, voluntary controlled and academies not within the diocesan MAT, are under the Diocesan Board of Education's influence. And may I just remind Synod that the church schools are funded by the state rather than the diocese. We've developed an action plan to reach net zero, and this has been coordinated with other areas of work through the Diocesan Environment Group. The first draft of our plan is well developed and separated into 4 areas. First, understanding. That's about energy consumption data and analysis, keeping abreast of new guidance, funding streams and best practice, obtaining professional advice such as building decarbonisation consultancy, and liaising with our partners such as the local authority and other diocesan multi-academy trusts. In terms of what we're doing, we're briefing our schools and their advisors on our net zero target. We're making key decisions aligned with the net zero target. We're seeking funding for fabric improvements and conversion to low carbon heating. We're minimising our travel. We're reviewing our energy purchasing strategy, and we're promoting educational programmes that encourage behavioural change. Third, influencing. We're publicising our plans and actions to schools and to the wider diocese, and we're engaging with the voluntary controlled and academy schools that aren't within the diocesan MAT. In terms of reviewing, we will establish a reporting structure for good governance, embed a monitoring programme to learn the lessons from significant capital projects, and we'll consider peer review opportunities, both within the diocese and wider afield. The diocesan education team is excited to build on the good work to date, but now change gear and rise to the challenge. Thank you, Richard.
Thank you, Daniel. And now I'm going to ask Dawn Gillett, who's going to tell us what steps have been made in clergy housing and what's planned there to achieve net zero carbon in the future. So over to you then, please, Dawn.
Thank you, Richard, and good morning, Synod. So firstly, just our starting point, looking at the current position with the clergy housing and our methods of monitoring and moving our story forward. So according to climate control information, 40% of emission comes from households. And we have, across our diocese, about 154 properties, a wide range of specifications and portfolio, building types and ages. So we cover very much the whole spectrum. Each house is individual, so we can't come up with an individual mass plan to cover everything. Out of our 150 houses, nearly 100 have got solar panels. Anything that hasn't is because of shading issues, and we are using gas and oil heating. So that's the basis of the starting point. This is just a snapshot of a couple of our properties, and I know some of you in the audience will recognise them. I and Hadley being the first two, which are our older properties, each with their own individual needs and concerns, and then moving up to our newer, the rectory at St George's, which the diocese built back in 2016, and Darsham, which we purchased to a high specification. So understanding our starting position, one of our key factors was to carry out EPCs, which are the energy performance certificates, on all our properties. And this is something that we're required to do to get a base assessment. And you'll see from the figures that the majority of our properties are C and D. So that's quite pleasing from a baseline. Gets more concerning as we get to F. F is a property that we wouldn't be able to rent out. Because they have to achieve a certain standard. So they're the properties that we can now focus. These are the properties that we need to focus our attention on to bring them up to a suitable rating. We mentioned the solar panels, and to set the standard for the baseline, we're discussing the matter with other diocesan property teams across the country. We'll also be looking at green deals and funding opportunities. So what we're doing already, we are doing quite a lot where we can. When we consider a new parsonage, we look at the EPC. Have they got solar panels? What sort of smart heating systems? And that's one of the factors we look at from our criteria. When existing lights fail, a bit like the pictures on the right there, we're putting in LEDs as we go along. We're trying to introduce smart heating systems and controls, and we're using local contractors to reduce travel. Influence, as you will know, the energy in our properties is met by the clergy. So we're working with the clergy to inform on any energy saving criteria and progress, encourage smart meters, and for those with solar panels, express the benefit of having an electric car that can be charged. With your solar panels, the clergy benefit from the energy during the day, and then this gives a big bonus. So the review, it's very much a learning cycle as we move towards carbon neutral. So we want to work as a team to review the energy and monitor any changes, and start to use actual energy costs through consultation with our clergy to get actual figures. And we can base this then against the investment needed to introduce the different systems. We're carrying out peer-to-peer review with neighbouring dioceses just to make sure we're on track. And we're working with specialist contractors as systems fail to make sure that we're getting the best system possible rather than just a like-for-like replacement. And as we move forward, the measures will be monitored and we'll report back to the environment group to continue the growth.
Thank you very much, Dawn. Thank you. Well, now, Oliver Clark, who is our Diocesan heating advisor, has asked me to read a brief report from himself. And he says this: the DAC with the assistance of the heating advisor, has been taking account of global warming for a number of years. This has been on a reactive basis, following requests for advice on heating and associated issues from PCCs and their representatives prior to submitting requests for LISB approval or submitting faculty applications. Sometimes the first opportunity to comment is on receipt of a faculty application, when the opportunity to examine alternative options is more limited. As an example, over the past 7 or 8 years, close to 50 churches with intermittent use and retaining pews have installed under-pew heaters, with more in the pipeline. Where churches have intermittent use but have removed the pews, low energy systems can require compromise on location, aesthetics and theological views, as shown here. Churches use more often, more efficient condensing boilers have been installed to replace inefficient boiler plant. Improvements to controls, installation, and other measures where appropriate have been included. Options are offered where available, and assistance is given to identify companies and websites to assist PCCs in producing the appropriate information for subsequent submission. While church halls generally fall outside the full remit of the DAC, the use of their advisors is encouraged, and in some cases solutions can be usefully combined. Since the General Synod motion, the DAC working group has been busy formulating a way forward with a view to issuing initial guidance in the next month or so, outlining early initiatives that can be taken, such as signing up to an improved green energy supplier and applying for an Eco-Church award. Information on fuel use and type is expected to be obtained shortly and added to the DAC's existing database. It's then hoped to issue a more comprehensive document towards the end of this year, dividing churches into fuel type and periods of use, with a footpath for the steps that can be taken to formulate a forward action plan to meet the General Synod target. It's recognised this may require a phased approach for some PCCs for various legitimate reasons, for example, the available finance. For the time being, this will remain a reactive process, but the information gained and the approach taken to contact all PCCs reflects the desire of the diocese and the DAC to move as rapidly as possible to a proactive process in the coming years. And obviously, I should emphasize that Oliver is there for advice whenever you need it, so do seek him out. So as I hope Synod can see, departments within the diocese are already moving towards net zero carbon and have been for some time. And indeed, one of the joys of becoming the lead on net zero carbon has been becoming part of an enthusiastic team, which is driving change forward in a realistic way. And I thank Daniel Jones, Dawn Gillett, James Halsell, and now Charlotte Hodgson, and Oliver Clark for all they have done and are doing to take the diocese forward to net zero carbon by 2030. They are the experts we can turn to whenever we need advice as we move forward. I'd also like to say a big thank you to Dean Joe and Annette Rooney and Naomi Sturgis at the Cathedral, who've embraced this change and indeed all things environmental and are working with great enthusiasm for a greener cathedral in the years to come. We're also supported by Janus van Helvert from Suffolk County Council and Julian Bryant from Christian Aid, who brings much advice and wisdom to the table. I've also greatly valued the advice and support of Tony Allwood on the group. So where do we go from here? For many churches, the changes needed will be small. Firstly, measuring their carbon footprint, which is being asked for in the Archdeacon's Articles of Inquiry and in parish returns, and some of you may already have filled those in. This will give us a baseline from which to measure progress and help us to see where major changes are needed. Secondly, we suggest simple things which will save the church money in most cases. A move to LED bulbs and as many lights as possible would ensure a drop in their electricity bills. Parish buying can help with this. The other major step is move towards a certified green energy supplier. And here are just two possibilities, but there are many others out there. Churches do this through parish buying, then they could again end up saving money. In the medium term, churches might look at any investments that they have and consider moving them into ethical funds that don't support the fossil fuel industries. We would also strongly advise churches to join the A Rocha Eco-Church scheme. which can guide them to being a much more environmentally friendly church in the long term. Clearly, in some churches where there are old heating boilers using oil and gas, which will need replacing anyway, we now hope they'll be replaced with a net zero carbon alternative. Planting trees on church land is a great way of capturing carbon and making a very attractive resource which people can enjoy for years to come. Our brothers and sisters in Kagera are way ahead of us on this and planted some 135,000 trees in 2019 alone. Tree nurseries are spreading around the diocese. Some churches, like some schools and many clergy houses, may look at generating their own electricity with solar panels. Obviously, this involves substantial capital investment, but can be financially viable in the long term. There is a great deal of advice out there, not least from the Church of England's own website. And I think you've all had this document sent to you in the bundle which you received from Synod. As a diocese, we've been providing a flow of information leaflets to help churches towards net zero carbon, including details of any grants which will become available, hopefully, over the next few years. Whatever churches decide to do, the Diocesan team is here to support you and offer good advice when you need it. Furthermore, the Net Zero Carbon Group will now be part of the Diocesan Environment Group, and so there'll also be plenty of information on the DEG Facebook page, which I urge you to look at and to join. Net zero carbon by 2030 is an ambitious target, but it is achievable if we all work together. We are truly facing an existential crisis, which is causing great injustice around the world and destroying God's creation. If that sentence sounds melodramatic, I assure you it isn't. It is a statement of fact.